Hey everybody, we're changing the structure of these a little bit. Instead of having all the sidebars that occurred during a witness at the end of the testimony, we're putting them in line with how they played out during the day. We feel this would provide a better context and hope you enjoy the shift. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome in everybody. Before we get started, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. You know, all the YouTubey things. Forget what you think you know about justice. Welcome to the virtual juror, where snark is reality, but evidence is royalty. Where at first we look at the FACS, or facts and conjecture shared, before we get into the real stuff. After the late afternoon Lank show drama, Tuesday morning in Dedham began with Sergeant Sean Goode returning to the hot seat. If anyone thought we were diving straight back into the magic taillight mystery, David Yannetti had other plans, starting with a deep dive into the Canton Police Department's digital breadhead trail. Yannetti kicked things off by asking about the high-tech world of Canton PD's entry system. Goode explained that every officer carries what looks like a credit card to swipe in and out of the station, the booking area, and the sally port. It's a system designed for high security and accountability. Unless, of course, you're looking for someone to actually explain how it works. Naturally, in a recurring theme for this investigation, the officer on the stand seemed to have very little idea of how the accountability part functions. When Yannetti tried to get technical about where the data goes, Goode retreated into the safe harbor of middle management ignorance. While he believes every come and go is swiped and recorded, he admitted he had no clue what software was used and had never personally accessed the logs. For the defense, however, the lack of educated responses from the witness didn't matter as much as the data itself. Yannetti, ever prepared, revealed that the defense and the Commonwealth had reached a rare moment of zen. He introduced a stipulation to enter the key swipe records from January 29, 2022 as an exhibit. We've moved on from tracking leaf blowers to tracking key swipes. Yannetti is hunting for a Where's Waldo moment in the digital logs to see who was coming and going from the station while John O'Keefe was allegedly in a snowbank, or a basement. Apparently, the defense thinks the key cards are about to tell a story the witnesses didn't. Meanwhile, Sergeant Goode is sticking to the I just work here script when it comes to technology. But because this is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Karen Reed, nothing is ever truly stipulated without a trip to the bench. Despite the agreement, Lally immediately requested to be seen for Sidebar 43 to deal with a sudden case of prosecutor's confusion. You see, Adam Lally arrived to court late this morning and admitted at the bench to being a little confused, struggling to keep up with the defense's sudden pivot to redacted TUI materials. While Miss Little had mentioned some blacked-out sections to him just before the session began, Lally seemed to be wandering through a fog. Yannetti, sensing an opportunity to lock in the evidence, pushed for the records to be admitted immediately, promising to keep them away from the jury's eyes until every last redaction was finalized. However, Canoni was in no mood for a trust-me approach. Exercising her judicial leeway, she firmly denied the request to admit them as full evidence, reminding Yannetti that she wasn't about to let unverified records float around her courtroom during cross-examination. She really said she has some leeway on admitting exhibits, especially on cross-examination. Why especially on cross, though? Shouldn't it be across the board? Instead, she downgraded the records to Exhibit R for identification, essentially putting the digital logs in a legal timeout until both sides could agree on what they were actually looking at. Lally's confusion didn't end with the ruling. He continued to wonder aloud where these specific copies came from, claiming they didn't look like the material he had provided from the Canton PD discovery. Maybe because they came from the Justice Department, your office claimed not to have exculpatory information, but I digress. The judge, clearly ready to get back to the testimony, shut down the logistical debate and sent everyone back to their stations. Apparently, even with a stipulation in hand, the paper trail in Canton is so tangled that the prosecutor can't recognize his own evidence. We've traded solo cup mysteries for Exhibit R enigmas, and for now the jury remains in the dark about who was scanning their way through the police station on that fateful morning. Following this sidebar, Yannetti immediately went for the jugular, questioning if the sergeant had used his overnight reprieve to solve the mystery of his evolving police report. Goode admitted he had scanned over his own paperwork for a few minutes, but insisted he hadn't discussed the matter with a soul, not his fellow officers, and certainly not the prosecution. It was a nothing-to-see-here setup until Yannetti pulled out the visual aids. The interrogation centered on two documents, Exhibit P and Exhibit Q, which Goode identified as face sheets for his official report. On the surface, they were identical twins, same incident number, same timestamp of 8:24 a.m., and the same reporting officer, Sean Goode. But as Yannetti steered the sergeant toward the right-hand corner of the page, the twin theory fell apart. One report featured a photo of a melted snow berm taken days later, while the other, bearing the exact same data, featured a completely different image of the area where John O'Keefe was found. Yannetti's point was sharp and uncomfortable. How could one official report have two different faces? Goode, sensing the trap, practically begged to explain, but Yannetti shut him down with a polite, "Mr. Lally will let you explain," keeping the sergeant pinned to the discrepancy. The defense's goal was clear, to suggest that the Canton PD paperwork was a living, breathing, and potentially altered organism, rather than a transparent record of a homicide. The drama hit a fever pitch when Yannetti moved to admit both face sheets as full exhibits, only to be met with a swift "sustained" from the judge. Cannoni wasn't ready to let the mystery photos into the permanent record just yet, summoning the lawyers to Sidebar 44 to figure out why Sergeant Goode's report appeared to be undergoing a mid-trial identity crisis. Looks like in Canton, a police report is apparently like a social media profile. You can just swap out the cover photo whenever the mood strikes, even if the facts are supposed to be frozen in time. Adam Lally began his objection questioning the relevance of the paperwork and essentially arguing that since the sergeant had already admitted the photos were different, the documents themselves were just clutter. But Yannetti wasn't after clutter. He was after the visual gut punch of showing the jury two official forms that were carbon copies in every detail except for the mysterious swap of the crime scene photos. The judge, ever wary of police reports becoming hearsay grenades, refused to let the whole documents in. She was particularly concerned about the phrase "no crime involved," a classic bit of early investigation optimism that she ruled was definitively inadmissible. Can you imagine if the jury had been able to see these? The solution was a judicial compromise involving a magic marker and a pair of scissors. Yannetti was given permission to show the top third of the reports, provided he whited out the problematic hearsay and literally cut the paper to ensure no accidental scrolling revealed the narrative underneath. Lally attempted one final danger territory warning, suggesting that if Yannetti implied the reports were different, the prosecution might be forced to enter the entire narrative to explain the discrepancy. The judge shut that down quick, noting that the whole point was that the reports were identical, making the photo swap even more bizarre. To prevent any digital mishaps, Alan Jackson suggested using the Elmo, the courtroom's old-school document camera, to display the physically amputated and whited out reports. We have reached the point in the trial where the evidence has to be physically mutated with scissors and markers before it's safe for the 19 jurors to see them. Cannoni is essentially acting as a scrapbooking editor, ensuring that the jury only sees the top third of Canton's confusing paperwork. It's a high-stakes game of cut and paste, and the defense is betting that even a severed police report is enough to show that something in the Canton PD's filing cabinet doesn't add up. While the courtroom staff was performing surgery on paperwork, David Yannetti continued to squeeze Sergeant Goode for answers about the shifting visuals of his investigation. This portion of the testimony was a seminar in pointing out the obvious until it became uncomfortable. Yannetti expertly bounced between Exhibit 20A, the original photo of the snow berm from the morning of the 29th, and the newly christened Exhibit 42, which featured a solitary piece of taillight allegedly found at the scene. The sergeant was forced to confirm a bizarre administrative reality. The version of his report, Exhibit P, featured the snowy berm, while the second version, Exhibit Q, featured the lonely shard of plastic. Yannetti made sure the jury didn't miss the punchline, that these two very different images were attached to face sheets that claimed to be the exact same report, generated at the exact same time. It was a visual spot the difference game played with the highest possible stakes. Once the judge saw that both sides were finally playing nice with the photos, she allowed the amputated top portions of the reports to be admitted as full exhibits. The jury was then treated to a 5-minute recess, likely giving them time to process why a police report seems to have more alternate endings than a choose-your-own-adventure novel. In this filing system, final report is apparently a loose suggestion. 1 minute you're looking at a pile of snow, and the next a piece of evidence magically appears in the header. Yannetti has effectively turned the sergeant's own paperwork into a witness for the defense. And Cannoni tried to make sure the jury got the 4x6 version of the confusion. Just as the jury was ushered out for a breather, Cannoni looked down at her desk and realized that David Yannetti's amputated reports were actually still very much attached to their bodies. Despite the high-stakes negotiations at Sidebar, the defense had handed over the full, hearsay-filled reports to the court reporter, merely folding the bottom halves back like a cheap poker bluff. Judge Cannoni was not amused. This just came into evidence with a whole report, she noted, pointing out that the folded piece of paper is still a whole piece of paper once it reaches the juror's hands. Yannetti's defense was the legal equivalent of the dog ate my homework. Or, in this case, the clerk didn't have scissors. Sensing the judicial temperament rising, he offered a sheepish apology, while the court reporter produced a pair of scissors to finally perform the promised surgery. The judge ordered the reports to be physically hacked apart and run through a copier to ensure the jury only received the sanitized top third fragments. But the judge wasn't just annoyed by the paperwork. She was officially over the Canton crawl. She delivered a blistering move-it-along lecture to both sides, reminding them that they were squandering weeks of the jurors' lives with repetitive evidence and avoidable logistical fumbles. We are now days into a trial where the evidence has to be literally cut with office supplies because the lawyers can't stop tripping over their own discovery. The judge has signaled that her patience is thinner than a piece of redacted bond paper, and if the alphabet soup doesn't start moving faster, the next thing being cut might be the lawyer's speaking time. After the literal arts and crafts session at the bench, the circumcised reports, now officially Exhibits 43 and 44, finally made their split-screen debut. David Yannetti, having successfully amputated the hearsay, focused his sights on the one thing that couldn't be whited out: the blatant contradiction in the Canton PD's filing cabinet. Yannetti marched Sergeant Goode through a rapid-fire list of identicals. Same incident number, same call number, same timestamp of 8/24, and the same reporting officer, Sergeant Sean Goode's signature. The documents were perfectly mirrored, until you hit the top right corner, where the original snowy berm had been replaced by a phantom piece of taillight in a version printed months later. Under Yannetti's pressure, Goode was forced to cough up a few inconvenient truths. He admitted he never saw a piece of taillight on January 29th. He never took a photo of a piece of taillight on January 29th. And, most importantly, the photo on Exhibit 44 was not from January 29th. When asked who performed the digital plastic surgery on his report, Goode went back to the "it wasn't me" defense. I guess he was channeling Shaggy. He claimed he didn't know which specific person altered the photo, arguing that while he was the reporting officer, he wasn't responsible for the supplementals added by other officers later. Yannetti, however, wasn't letting him off that easy. reminding him that the document still screams his name as the man in charge of its contents. Yannetti tried to land a final blow by asking if it was misleading to slap a late-arriving photo onto a report dated the morning of the crime, but Cannetti shielded the witness with a pair of sustained objections. Still, the point was made. There is absolutely nothing on the official face sheet to tell a reader that the taillight shard was a later addition to the narrative. David Yannetti just ended his cross-examination by making Sean Goode admit that his own police report is essentially a chronological lie. It's a document that claims to be from 8:24 a.m. on the day O'Keefe was found, yet it features evidence that hadn't even been discovered, in quotes, yet. In this world of paperwork, time is a flat circle, and the reporting officer is a title that comes with all the credit and none of the responsibility. Yannetti sat down, having successfully painted the Canton PD filing system as a place where evidence is retroactively photoshopped into history. Adam Lally stepped up for redirect, with the unenviable task of explaining why Sergeant Goode's police report looked like it had been through a digital blender. His goal was simple: turn the sinister alterations David Yannetti had highlighted into boring administrative glitches. Lally first cleared up some timeline confusion regarding the Albert family's local power. While Chris Albert is currently a town selectman, Lally made sure the jury knew he wasn't yet back in January 2022. Apparently, the Commonwealth wants us to believe that the Albert influence only officially kicked in after the election. Lally revisited the infamous 2009, not 2012 as previously discussed, Tim Albert fluid trail incident. He had Goode confirm that they didn't just find Tim's car at 34 Fairview. They actually charged him. It was Lally's way of saying, "See? We arrest the Alberts. Even if we do just follow the oil spills to their front door and skip the breathalyzer." Turning to the report discrepancies, Goode explained that the face sheet isn't the actual meat of the report. It's just a digital cover page. He insisted that his narrative, the meat, hadn't changed, even if the face had been given a mysterious makeover. Finally, Goode got to give the explanation Yannetti had blocked. He claimed that the Canton PD's software is basically on autopilot. When new supplemental photos are added to the case file, like, say, a piece of taillight found days later, the system might automatically grab the newest image and slap it onto the face sheet of the original report. According to the Commonwealth, there's no conspiracy here, just a really unhelpful computer program. Lally wants the jury to believe that the Canton PD software is like a chaotic Instagram feed. It just keeps refreshing the cover photo of a homicide report with whatever new evidence pops up, regardless of whether this evidence existed when the report was written. The meat is fine, says Goode. It's just the face that's a bit of a mess. David Yannetti was not about to let Adam Lally's "We arrest the Alberts too" narrative stand without one final sharp jab. In a blink and you'll miss it recross, he managed to remind the jury that some investigations are a lot easier than others. Yannetti had Sergeant Goode admit that the 2009 case against Tim Albert was not exactly a Sherlock Holmes mystery. Between Sergeant Lank literally following a fluid trail to the front door of 34 Fairview and Tim Albert basically handing over a confession by admitting he got nervous, the evidence was less of a mountain and more of a skyscraper. Then came the final blow. Yannetti asked if Goode was aware that despite the strong evidence and the formal charges, the case was simply dismissed once Tim paid a little restitution. Lally was on his feet with an objection before the word "dismissed" could even echo in the room. Cannoni, of course, sustained it instantly, ordering the jury to disregard the comment and striking it from the record. Yannetti knows that once a bell is rung, it's hard to unhear it. He successfully planted the seed that even when the Canton PT does charge an Albert, the legal system has a way of making it all go away, with a checkbook and a handshake. The sergeant was excused from the stand, likely relieved to leave his face sheet and fluid trail behind. We're moving on to the next witness, but the scent of the 2009 transmission fluid is still hanging in the air. Just as Adam Lally prepared to summon Sergeant Michael Lank for the main event, Cannoni hit the brakes. Before Lank could even adjust his tie, the legal teams were summoned for Sidebar 45, which felt less like a professional conference and more like a trip to the principal's office. The judge wasted no time addressing David Yannetti's mic drop moment about the Tim Albert case dismissal. "I expect better from you than that," she chided, clearly unimpressed by the defense's attempt to smuggle in a settled by restitution narrative that she had already ruled out of bounds. Yannetti tried to play the "I thought it was admissible" card, but the judge wasn't having it. The court still hadn't officially decided how much of Lank's 2002 biting and spitting saga would be allowed in front of the jury. Because that legal puzzle remained unsolved, Lally could not start his direct examination without risking a mistrial. The judge, clearly frustrated by the lack of prepared witnesses, asked if the Commonwealth had anyone else ready to go, or if she had to subject the 19 jurors to yet another alphabet soup delay. With the morning schedule in tatters and the lawyers still arguing over 22-year-old bar fights, the judge finally threw in the towel. "Jurors, I'm sorry to do this to you," she announced, before banishing them to the jury room for an early 15-minute morning break while the adults in the room tried to figure out the rules of engagement. We are now at a point where the judge is literally scolding the lawyers for their courtroom etiquette, while the jury is being treated like a group of toddlers on a long car ride. Are we there yet? No, we're not. We're stuck at a sidebar because the defense tried to sneak in a play-by-play theory, and the prosecution did not have a backup witness. The judge is officially out of patience, and Sergeant Lank is still lurking in the hallway waiting to see if his 2002 origin story is too spicy for public consumption. With the jury safely tucked away for a break, Cannoni held court on the most anticipated legal battle of the week. How much of Sergeant Lank's 2002 origin story would actually see the light of day? Alan Jackson came prepared to paint a masterpiece of corruption, intending to walk the jury through the entire ballroom brawl, the allegations of police misconduct, and the fact that the victims were turned away from the station when they tried to report Lank's favoritism towards Chris Albert. Judge Cannoni, however, was in the mood for a light sketch, not a full-blown mural. She immediately threw cold water on Jackson's late police reports and reminded him that the Alberts are not all one entity. In her view, just because Lank helped Chris in 2002 doesn't automatically mean he's covering for Brian in 2024. She ruled that while the defense could establish the relationship and the fact that Lank intervened on Chris's behalf, the particulars of the fight and the federal investigation were strictly off limits. The judge then issued a series of hard no's. The mobile gas station incident is out. She wasn't convinced it was about the Alberts rather than Lank's own ego. The not guilty verdicts are also out. She deemed it speculative, noting that the jurors find people not guilty for all sorts of reasons. A bit of judicial irony considering the room she was sitting in. And the federal lawsuit? Also out. It's too old and too prejudicial. What stayed in was the timing. Jackson won the right to show that the Lapalato brothers tried to file a complaint against Lank and were turned away. And only after that attempt did the police report and criminal charges against the brothers magically appear. To balance the scales, she gave Lally permission to use the Tim Albert arrest to show animosity between Lank and the family, provided he didn't trip over any open doors. The judge has officially handed Jackson a very specific, very short leash. He can tell the jury that Lank is the Albert family's longtime guardian angel, but he has to do it without mentioning the biting, the spitting, or the fact that a court once cleared the people Lank arrested. Jackson got his timeline of retaliation in, but he's been warned. If he takes longer than 10 minutes or repeats himself, the judge might just lose what's left of her patience. The recess is over. The scissors are put away, And after the legal sparring over his 2002 history, Sergeant Mike Lank, now lieutenant, is finally headed to the stand. If the previous witness was about digital logs, Lank's testimony was about the visceral, messy reality of the morning John O'Keefe was found, a reality involving heavy snow, local ties, and some very unconventional evidence collection. Lank, a 24-year veteran of the Canton PD, testified that he arrived at 34 Fairview at approximately 6:24 a.m. after a call from Sergeant Goode. He lives fairly close, which allowed him to be one of the first supervisors on the scene. One of Lank's first moves was to call in the CPAC unit, the State Police Investigators. However, he dropped a significant nugget for the defense. Trooper Michael Proctor called him back and informed him that the state police would not be responding to the scene initially. Lank confirmed he went to the Albert home 3 separate times that morning. He spoke with Brian and Nicole Albert, noting that Brian appeared disheveled as if he had just woken up. Despite his long history in Canton, Lank described his relationship with Brian Albert as merely civil, denying any close social bond. In what has become one of the trial's most debated sequences to date, Lank described using a leaf blower to clear snow and reveal evidence. This process uncovered blood drops and a broken cocktail glass. Because of the deteriorating weather and a lack of proper kits, the officers secured the blood evidence using 6 red Solo cups borrowed from a neighbor's house. But let's be honest, the house was another lieutenant from the Canton PD. Lank personally transported these cups and the glass back to the station in his police truck. He then jumped ahead to February 4th, 6 days after the incident. He testified that after a thaw, he returned to the scene where Chief Berkowitz pointed out a piece of red plastic, assuming taillight, sitting on top of the now melted snow. Lank photographed the shard before Trooper Buchanan arrived to bag it. The courtroom went silent as Lank donned evidence gloves to pull the actual broken cocktail glass out of a box, displaying the jagged shards for the jury. This is Exhibit 45. Sergeant Lank's direct examination was a show in small-town policing. We have an investigator who's known the homeowners since he was a kid, a crime scene processed with a leaf blower, and blood evidence stored in party cups. To the Commonwealth, this was a heroic effort to save evidence from a blizzard. To the defense, it's a manual on how to contaminate a crime scene. Lank managed to keep his cool under Lally's questioning, but the civil relationship he claims with the Alberts is about to be put through the Alan Jackson ringer. Before Jackson could even clear his throat for cross-examination, he called for a quick sidebar, number 46, to give Judge Cannoni a heads up. He was going for broke immediately. Jackson signaled that he intended to dive straight into Sergeant Lank's 2002 history with the Albert family, getting the relationship issues out in the open before the first minute of cross was even up. After the sidebar, recognizing that things were about to get spicy, Judge Cannoni turned to the jury to issue a limiting instruction. She warned the 19 jurors that while they were about to hear about an event from years ago, they weren't to use it to judge Lank's character in general. Instead, they were to consider it strictly for 2 reasons: evaluating the credibility of the witness and deciding if there was any bias or favoritism in how the police handled the investigation into Karen Reed. The judge has essentially given the jury a favoritism filter. She's told them, listen to this story, but only to decide if this cop has a reason to protect the people whose yard he was digging in. It's the green light Alan Jackson has been waiting for, and with the judge's warning ringing in their ears, the jury is now primed to see if Sergeant Lank is a neutral investigator or the Albert family's personal fixer. AJ wasted no time turning the spotlight on Lieutenant Lank's lifelong ties to the Albert family, creating a vision of a neighborhood cop who doesn't just know the residents, he fights for them. Jackson established that Lank has known the Albert brothers, Brian, Chris, and Tim, since he was as young as 12 years old, if not earlier. describing Chris Albert as a pretty good friend through high school and into their 20s. Jackson then pivoted sharply to August of 2002, where an off-duty, alcohol-consuming Lank was approached by Chris Albert in a parking lot. Lank admitted that after Chris told him about the altercation, he activated himself and jumped into a physical fight with two brothers, the Lopolatos, who were confronting Chris. Under Jackson's interrogation, Lank admitted to wrestling on the ground with one of the men, while the other was handcuffed by arriving officers. The punchline? No one was arrested that night, and Lank did not write a report until the Lopolato brothers showed up at the station the next day to file a complaint against him. Lank was forced to admit the chronological reality. The fight happened, a complaint was sought against him, and only then were police reports filed against the brothers. Lank repeatedly resisted the friendship label, insisting he was merely helping a scared citizen who just happened to be his longtime buddy, Chris Albert. Jackson drew a direct parallel between Lank activating himself off duty in 2002 to help an Albert and doing the exact same thing in 2022 when John O'Keefe was found. Jackson scored a significant point when Lank conceded he was aware that the Canton Police Department was ultimately recused from the O'Keefe investigation specifically because of a perceived bias or conflict of interest regarding the Albert family. Lank admitted that before he even brought his cruiser to a stop on the morning of January 29, 2022, he knew exactly whose house it was. Jackson just gave the jury a lesson in the Albert Guardian theory. He's arguing that Lieutenant Lank has a 20-year track record of using his badge to play bouncer for the Alberts, specifically waiting for a complaint to be filed before magically remembering to write a police report. In Lank's world, an Albert in trouble isn't a conflict of interest, it's a citizen in need. Jackson has set the stage. If Lank was willing to get into a drunken bar fight for Chris Albert in 2002, what would he do for Brian Albert in 2022? Just as the dashcam footage from January 29th was ready to roll, Alan Jackson took a preemptive trip to the bench in Sidebar 47. A move necessitated by Canoni's increasingly short fuse regarding the trial's alphabet soup pace. Alan Jackson, sensing that the judge was one sustained objection away from a total meltdown, decided to offer a roadmap for his next move. He informed Judge Canoni that he planned to play a 5-minute stretch of video, hitting the pause button at 4 specific intervals to grill Lieutenant Lank on the visual evidence. It was a polite way of saying, "I'm not wasting time, I'm finding the needle in the haystack." The judge, ever vigilant against the defense's rhetorical flair, gave her blessing with one stern condition: just don't narrate it. She wanted the video to speak for itself, without Jackson acting as the color commentator of the Canton Police's pre-dawn activities. We've reached the negotiated playback phase of the trial. Jackson is now essentially clearing his TV time with the principal before he dares to touch the remote. He's promised not to narrate, and the judge has promised not to get too impatient. The stage is set for a high-stakes viewing party, where the defense hopes the dashcam will show what the solo cups and leaf blower couldn't: the truth of what was happening on the Alberts' front lawn while the world was still asleep. With the judge watching the clock and the dashcam footage rolling, Alan Jackson took the jury on a frame-by-frame tour of what he implies was a highly coordinated morning at 34 Fairview. Jackson's cross-examination of Lieutenant Lank focused on a 5-minute missing window, where the sergeant was more focused on a mysterious phone call than securing the potential crime scene. Jackson hammered Lank on why he allowed Jennifer McCabe, a prime witness who had been with O'Keefe just hours earlier, to go inside the Albert house and wake up the other witnesses before any of them had been interviewed. Lank admitted he didn't think it was important to separate them, essentially allowing the whole group to discuss the facts over coffee before the police ever came knocking. As the video played, Jackson highlighted a gray North Face jacket. This was Lank, pacing back and forth, glued to his cell phone for over 5 minutes. Lank claimed he couldn't remember who he was talking to. Though he had made an educated guess, it wasn't the state police. At least not yet. In a dramatic sequence, Jackson noted that while Lank was on this call, the rest of the world cleared out. The paramedics left, the fire trucks left, and Karen Reed left. Only after every non-Albert witness was gone and Jen McCabe had been inside for 3 minutes did the lights finally turn on inside 34 Fairview. Jackson caught Lank in a minor linguistic trap. He played back Lank's own words to dispatch, where the lieutenant explicitly stated, "I'm not sure if he's been in a fight or whatever." Jackson pounced. Lank hadn't even seen the body, yet his first instinct wasn't a car accident. It was a physical altercation. Despite this, Lank admitted he didn't treat the house as a crime scene. Alan Jackson just displayed an image of an investigation that was coordinated rather than conducted. In his version of events, Lieutenant Lank spent the morning pacing the sidewalk like a worried relative, waiting for the all-clear from Jen McCabe before he dared to step onto the Alberts' porch. By the time the lights came on, the story had potentially been baked, the witnesses had been unified, and the sergeant had already told dispatch the F word, or fight. Lank insists he was just considering a multitude of things, but Jackson has the jury wondering why hit and run wasn't even on the lieutenant's vocabulary list at 6:30 a.m. When Lally objected to Jackson's questions about the house being a potential crime scene, the judge yet again asked him what his objection was. He called it speculation. Jackson fired back in Sidebar 48, arguing he wasn't asking for a guess, but rather the detective's state of mind at the time. The judge, shockingly, semi-sided with Lally on the phrasing, but gave Jackson a green light to keep digging, provided he could find a more artful way to ask it. Her ruling? Ask it differently. Jackson is being forced to play a linguistic game of Mother May I. He wants to prove Lank ignored the obvious, but he has to do it without making the lieutenant play psychic. Alan Jackson's cross-examination of Lieutenant Lank moved from the sidewalk into the house, where he showed an investigation that stopped exactly where the Albert family's comfort zone began. Jackson cornered Lank on his state of mind regarding the house as a crime scene. Lank admitted that if a fight happened, it could have started anywhere, but claimed he didn't search the house because Jen McCabe told him O'Keefe never made it inside. Jackson's retort, "So you just took Mrs. McCabe's word for it?" Lank admitted he had no way of knowing if she was lying. Despite knowing a man lay dying 30 feet from the door, Lank admitted he never made it past the front foyer. He didn't look in the basement, didn't check for broken furniture, and didn't look for blood or DNA because he claimed he lacked probable cause. Jackson hammered him on the lack of basic police work. No photos of the interior, no diagrams, and no attempt to secure the vital electronic devices of the people inside. In a move that defied standard investigative techniques, Lank offered he interviewed Bryant Albert, Nicole Albert, and Jen McCabe all together, within earshot of one another. He didn't separate them, didn't record them, and allowed them to hear each other's stories, essentially letting them align their timelines in real time. The tension peaked when Jackson brought up the evidence collection. Lank stated he personally scooped blood into unsealed solo cups. When Jackson asked if he was aware that the state police crime lab warns against using plastic for biological material, Lank simply said no. In the most stinging visual of the day, Jackson showed photos of the blood evidence sitting in the Canton PD Sallyport. Instead of a sealed, labeled evidence bag, the 6 solo cups appeared to be stored in a Stop and Shop grocery bag. Lank tried to defend it by saying it looks like a Stop and Shop bag. That's exactly what our evidence bags look like. But he had to admit there was no visible evidence tape, no property number, and no seal on the side shown in the photos. According to Lieutenant Lank, 34 Fairview wasn't a crime scene. It was just a house where he had a civil chat with friends while a body cooled on the lawn. By his own admission, he didn't search, didn't separate witnesses, and stored the most critical biological evidence in the case in a supermarket bag. To the defense, this wasn't an investigation. It was a concierge service for the Albert family. Lank might not remember the protocol for evidence tape, but the jury will certainly remember the Stop and Shop solo cups. Just as the jury was ushered out for a breather, Judge Cannoni took a moment during Sidebar 49 to remind Alan Jackson that he doesn't own the courtroom. In a classic judge scolding, she told him in no uncertain terms that he is not to touch the evidence screen without her express permission. Jackson tried to play it cool, arguing that since the items, we're talking about photos here, were already in evidence, he thought he had a free pass. Cannoni wasn't having it. You don't just freely walk around the courtroom and put up displays. She even threw a bit of shade at local counsel David Yannetti for not teaching the out-of-towner the house rules. Once the screen protocol drama settled, the sidebar turned into a high-stakes debate over discovery violation versus impeachment evidence. David Yannetti fought to use a batch of new photos, some of which supposedly show firefighter Katie McLaughlin and Caitlin Albert, remember her, Brian Albert's daughter, drinking in a hot tub in Maine and hugging at a baby shower. The defense's goal? To prove McLaughlin lied when she minimized their friendship as just a casual high school acquaintance. Adam Lally fired back, calling the defense's characterization of the witnesses repulsive, a word the judge quickly struck from the record. Lally argued that these photos are cumulative and don't prove anything beyond what the witnesses already admitted. They went to high school together and hung out in groups. The judge sided with the Commonwealth. She ruled that the defense committed a discovery violation by not turning these photos over sooner, even though they were received after McLaughlin testified. Furthermore, she found the evidence cumulative, noting that Jackson already got the answers he needed during cross-examination. The main photos and the baby shower hugs were officially out, marked only as Exhibit S for identification, never to be seen by the jury. Alan Jackson got a lesson in courtroom manners, and David Yannetti got his main hot tub photos tossed in the legal trash bin. The judge isn't interested in a 3-page argument or a photo album of old friendships. She wants to keep this trial moving. The defense thinks they found a smoking gun of witness collusion. The judge thinks they've just found a discovery violation. After Alan Jackson's brutal cross-examination, Adam Lally stepped up for a bit of damage control, attempting to scrub the Stop and Shop grime off Lieutenant Lank's reputation. He gave Lank the floor to recontextualize the parking lot fight. According to Lank, he wasn't just a drinking buddy jumping in for Chris Albert. He was a hero, obliged by a bar owner to drive a patron home when he was ambushed by a terrified Chris Albert. Lank claimed he tried to defuse the situation, but the Lopalato brothers weren't having it, leading to a wrestling match where he had to defend himself. As for the late report, Lank says his supervisor told him to just handle it the next time he was at work. Lally tried to dismantle the family fixer narrative by pointing out a simple biological fact. Just because their last name is Albert doesn't mean they're the same person. Lank insisted that his 2002 history with Chris had absolutely nothing to do with his 2022 investigation into Brian's yard. Remember that 5-minute phone call on the dash cam? Lank finally offered up that educated guess Jackson was fishing for. He believes he was on the phone with his boss, Lieutenant Gallagher. Lank clarified that during the first 2 interviews, the Alberts were basically just sitting on the stairs while Jen McCabe stood to his right. By the 3rd visit, the one Jackson implied was a story aligning session, Lank claimed they moved into the dining and kitchen area. Despite Jackson's insinuations, Lank doubled down. For the third time in a row, he saw nothing askew or out of place inside the house. Adam Lally's redirect was a valiant attempt to tell the jury, "Move along, nothing to see here." He wants them to believe Lank is just a small-town cop doing small-town things, helping neighbors, taking calls from his boss, and occasionally wrestling people in parking lots when duty or friendship calls. Lally's message was clear. A 20-year-old fight doesn't equal a 20-year-old cover-up. Whether the jury buys that, or if they're still stuck on the image of blood collected in solo cups and placed in a grocery bag, is the million-dollar question. Just when it looked like Lieutenant Lank might escape the 2002 parking lot unscathed, Alan Jackson sprinted back to the bench for Sidebar 50. Jackson was, to put it mildly annoyed. He pointed out that while he had strictly followed the judge's orders not to get into the weeds of the fight, Lally had just handed Lank a megaphone to broadcast a one-sided, heroic version of events. Jackson's argument was simple. Lally let Lank claim he was a victim who was punched and threatened by men who didn't care who he was. If that heroic narrative was going to stand, Jackson wanted to show the jury the other side of the coin. The judge seemingly agreeing that Lally's cleanup went a step too far into the storytelling, Jackson was given the green light for a surgical recross. She allowed 3 specific points of attack. He could make a no-conviction counter. If these guys supposedly assaulted a cop in front of other cops, why weren't they ever convicted of it? He could use the miserable quote. Jackson wanted to flip the script on who was doing the threatening, alleging that Lank was the one who told the brothers, "I'm going to make your life miserable." And he could bring up a Chris Albert aide wrap-up, reminding the jury one last time that this was all about Lank protecting an Albert. Adam Lally tried to give Lank a hero's exit, but he accidentally opened the door that the judge had previously kept bolted shut. By letting Lank play victim, Lally gave Jackson the right to point out a jury, or at least a prosecutor back in 2002, didn't seem to buy Lank's assaulted officer story. The judge essentially told Jackson, he opened the door, you get to walk through it. However, we think the most shocking part of this sidebar is the comment the judge made to Lally as she was telling Jackson he could get into this line of questioning. "I'm going to allow it, Mr. Lally, and I feel bad." Judge, we're barely into the Commonwealth's case, and many at home already felt bias was showing. This doesn't help people feel like they're being treated fairly in the justice system in Norfolk County. Alan Jackson didn't waste a second of the extra rope the judge handed him. In a lightning-fast recross, he stripped the hero paint off Lieutenant Lank's 2002 parking lot story, turning Lank's defense of a citizen in need back into a case of Albert family protection. Jackson went straight for the credentials of Lank's victimhood. He pointed out that despite Lank's claim of being physically assaulted in front of other officers, the Lopalato brothers were never convicted of anything related to the incident. The implication for the jury? The legal system didn't buy Lank's version of the fight back then, so why should they? Jackson attempted to flip the script on the tough talk. While Lank claimed the brothers were the ones throwing the F word, Jackson suggested it was actually Lank who used his position of power to threaten them, allegedly saying, "I don't know who you are, but I'm going to make your life miserable." Lank denied it, but the seed was planted. AJ ended exactly where he started, the name. Lank clung to his scared citizen defense, but Jackson got him to admit one last time that the terrified citizen in question happened to be an Albert. Alan Jackson just put a bow on the family fixer narrative and handed it to the jury. He argued that Lank has been rewriting history to protect Alberts since at least 2002. First, by filing reports only after he was complained about, and now by claiming a heroic defense in a fight that resulted in 0 convictions. Lank is finally off the stand, but he leaves behind the image of an investigator who views the world through an Albert First lens. With Lieutenant Lank and his supermarket evidence bags finally in the rear view, the Commonwealth called Lieutenant Charles Ray to the stand, a 25-year veteran of the Canton PD who oversees the Family Services Unit. Ray was brought in to provide a wholesome contrast to the previous testimony. He was the man tasked with checking on the kids. Ray testified that he arrived for the day shift at 7:45 a.m. and learned that a Boston cop had been found unresponsive at the Albert house. Fearing that John O'Keefe's young niece and nephew were home alone while their guardians, John and Karen, were at the hospital, Ray and Sergeant Meehan headed to 1 Meadows Ave for a well-being check. Ray noted this move was either suggested by former Chief Berkowitz or organically developed because it was simply the right thing to do. Lally published the dashcam footage from Ray's cruiser, 682, showing the vehicle pulled out of the Sallyport and arriving at the O'Keefe's home around 8:23 a.m. The video showed the driveway covered in the early stages of a forecasted snowstorm. The real reason for Ray's appearance became clear when Lally asked about the car parked in the driveway. Karen Reed's black Lexus. Ray admitted that since he was there to find active children rather than a dead body, he didn't have any reason to inspect the vehicle. However, Lally pointed out that the dashcam captured the state of the right rear passenger side, the infamous taillight area, as it sat in the driveway that morning. After the defense spent hours painting the Canton PD as a band of Albert protecting Keystone cops, Lally is trying to reset the narrative. He's showing the jury a compassionate police force concerned about unattended children, but don't let the Family Services title fool you. This witness is a strategic Trojan horse. By having Ray pull into a driveway at 8:23 a.m., Lally is trying to use the cruiser's dash cam to prove what Karen Reed's taillight looked like before it was seized, hoping to debunk the defense's planted evidence theory. Just as Lieutenant Ray was getting settled into the Meadows Ave driveway, Adam Lally realized the clock was winning. He called a final sidebar, number 51 of this trial, and we just started the 16th witness. He aimed to check the judge's pulse on scheduling, noting he still had several minutes of cruiser footage and the much-anticipated Ring videos to get through. Acknowledging that the jury's attention span was likely buried under a foot of well-forecasted snow, Judge Cannoni decided to call it a day. She broke the news to Lieutenant Ray that he'd be the first guest back in the hot seat the next morning. Before the jury headed out of the room, the judge issued her standard 3 commandments. 1. Don't talk about the case, even to your goldfish. 2. Don't be a detective. No Google, no street views. And 3. Ignore the noise. If you see a headline, look away, like you just saw your ex. The day ended with a "we'll pick this up in the morning." The Commonwealth has successfully moved from the Solo Cup saga and into the well-being check era. Next, we should get the digital evidence, the Ring videos that the prosecution hopes will show a broken taillight, and the defense hopes will show, well, something else entirely. Well, that's all we have. So as always, love your family, love your pets, love your neighbors, and we'll see you next time.
Standing here in the shadows of doubt, wheels of fate turning, can't figure it out. Hands are heavy, hearts are stone. This weight I carry can't do it alone.